What if I told you that the words you speak over your own life are not just descriptions of reality, but are actually creating your reality? That every time you judge a situation as impossible, every time you label someone as sick, every time you declare something as lacking, you're not observing truth, you're building prison walls around miracles? Smith Wigglesworth understood something that most believers never discover in their entire lifetime. He walked through hospitals where doctors had given up hope, and the dead were raised. He stood before impossible circumstances that would crush ordinary faith, yet watched as divine power shattered every limitation. But here's what most people miss about Wigglesworth's extraordinary life of miracles. It wasn't about how much faith he had. It was about what he refused to do with his words and his consciousness. Has this ever happened to you? You pray for healing, yet every conversation you have reinforces the sickness. You ask God for provision, but your thoughts constantly rehearse the lack. You declare you're believing for breakthrough, while your judgments about the situation build walls that even your prayers can't penetrate. We've been taught that judgment is about being critical or harsh toward others, but Wigglesworth discovered something far more mystical, far more powerful, and frankly, far more dangerous than we've ever been told. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Here's the truth that will transform everything you think you know about faith and manifestation. Every single judgment you make is a creative act. When you look at your bank account and judge it as not enough, you're not making an observation. You're making a decree in the invisible realm. When you see someone struggling and label them as broken, you're not showing sympathy. You're reinforcing bondage in the spiritual atmosphere. Wigglesworth called this the hidden barrier to answered prayer, and it's why so many sincere believers see so little power. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely revolutionize your spiritual walk. The reason your circumstances haven't changed, the reason that healing hasn't manifested, the reason that provision seems delayed, it might have nothing to do with your faith being too weak or God being distant. It could be that every day, dozens of times, you're unknowingly using the creative power of your consciousness to build the very limitations you're praying to break free from. Wigglesworth learned to see through the veil of appearance into the realm of divine reality, and when he did, the impossible became his normal. He discovered that God's universe operates on principles that most of us violate constantly without even knowing it. And the foundation of this mystical understanding rests on two words that Jesus spoke. Two words that contain enough power to transform your health, your finances, your relationships, and your entire destiny. But to access this power, you'll need to understand what judgment really is, why it's so spiritually dangerous. Think about how your mind works for just a moment. You walk into a room, and instantly, without even trying, you're categorizing everything you see. That person looks successful. This situation seems hopeless. That problem appears insurmountable. Your bank balance screams poverty. Your body signals sickness. It's automatic, isn't it? This constant internal commentary running through your consciousness, labeling, defining, judging every single thing that crosses your path. We think we're just observing reality, making practical assessments about the world around us. But here's the hidden truth that will shake everything you believe about how life actually works. Wigglesworth discovered that what we call seeing is actually creating. Every judgment, every label, every assessment you make isn't passive observation. It's an active force in the invisible realm. When you look at someone struggling with illness and think, they're so sick, you believe you're just acknowledging facts. But in that moment, your consciousness is acting like a reinforcement beam, strengthening the very condition you're observing. You're not a neutral witness to their suffering. You've become an unconscious participant in maintaining it. This sounds radical, I know. It goes against every logical fiber of our rational minds. But Wigglesworth spent decades proving this principle in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. He would sit beside hospital beds where doctors had pronounced death sentences, where every visible sign screamed hopeless, where human perception could see nothing but devastation and loss. And in those moments, he made a decision that defied everything natural. He refused to accept what his eyes were showing him as the ultimate reality. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because understanding the mechanics of this spiritual law will completely transform your approach to every challenge you face. Wigglesworth wasn't practicing positive thinking or trying to convince himself that sick people were actually healthy. That's not what this is about. He had trained his spiritual vision to see past the temporary appearance into the eternal reality that exists in God's realm. He looked at a dying body and recognized the indestructible life of God dwelling within. He witnessed poverty and saw the infinite abundance that is every person's true spiritual inheritance. He observed chaos and perceived the perfect divine order underneath all appearances. If this resonates with you and you want to keep diving deeper into these spiritual principles that actually transform lives, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You'll get access to teachings that most people never encounter in traditional settings. This wasn't denial. This wasn't pretending. This was accessing a dimension of reality that most believers never tap into because we've been conditioned to trust only what our physical senses report. The impact of this shift in perception is staggering. When you stop reinforcing problems with your judgmental consciousness, something extraordinary happens. You stop being part of the problem and become a clear channel for the solution. The healing, the breakthrough, the transformation. It doesn't come from you working harder or believing stronger. It emerges naturally when you remove the barrier your own judgments have been creating. Every day you're making hundreds of micro-judgments that are shaping your reality far more than your prayers ever could. That's the revelation that changes everything. Your consciousness is either building walls or opening doors, and the choice happens in those split-second moments when you decide what you're going to call real. Write in the comments, "I see beyond appearances," if this revelation is landing in your spirit right now. Let me give you a practical example that will make this crystal clear. Imagine someone close to you is battling depression. Maybe it's a family member, a friend, or even yourself. The conventional response, the one that feels compassionate and caring, is to acknowledge their struggle. You think about how depressed they are. You talk about their depression with others. You see them through the lens of their emotional pain. Every conversation reinforces the narrative. They're going through such a dark time. And here's what we miss completely. Every single one of those thoughts, as well-intentioned as they are, is acting like fertilizer to the very condition you want to see destroyed. This is where Wigglesworth's understanding becomes almost shocking in its implications. He would look at someone drowning in depression and make a decision that seems almost cold at first glance. He refused to see them as depressed, not because he didn't care, but because he cared enough to see the truth. In his consciousness, he held this reality. God knows absolutely nothing about depression. In the divine mind, this person standing before him is whole, complete, radiating life and joy. The appearance of depression is just that, an appearance, not the fundamental truth of who they are. Now, this doesn't mean you ignore someone's pain or refuse to offer practical support. That's not what this journey is about. You can sit with someone, listen to them, help them get the resources they need, all while maintaining this inner knowing that what you're seeing isn't their ultimate reality. Your compassion operates on the human level, but your consciousness remains anchored in the spiritual truth. And here's the mystery that defies all human logic. When you hold someone in that space of perfection rather than agreement with their problem, transformation becomes possible in ways that sympathy alone could never accomplish. Behind the scenes of every miracle Wigglesworth witnessed was this unwavering commitment to align his consciousness with divine reality rather than human perception. Think about what that means for a moment. There's not your mind, my mind, and God's mind operating as separate entities. There is one consciousness, and that consciousness is divine. When you judge something, you're essentially saying, My assessment of this situation is more accurate than God's reality. You're operating from the illusion of separation, as if your limited human perspective somehow trumps the infinite wisdom and perfect knowledge of the Creator. This is exactly why Jesus could look at a paralyzed man and see someone who could walk, why he could stand before a tomb and see life instead of death, why he could face storms and see peace. He wasn't creating new realities through the force of his will. He was recognizing what was already true in the divine consciousness. And that recognition, that alignment with the one mind, caused the invisible truth to become visible in the physical realm. The impact of understanding this principle rewrites everything we think we know about prayer, about faith, about how change actually happens. You're not trying to convince God to alter circumstances. You're withdrawing your agreement with the illusion so that divine reality can manifest. Every moment you spend judging something as broken, you're strengthening the illusion. Every moment you align with God's perfect knowing, you're dissolving the barriers. Put in the comments, "I align with divine consciousness," if you're beginning to grasp how powerful this shift really is. Let me share a story that brings this out of the abstract and into your everyday reality. There was a man named Andrew who had poured everything into his business. For months, he watched it spiral downward despite his best efforts. Every morning, he'd look at the numbers and the same judgments would flood his mind. Not enough customers walking through the door, too much debt piling up, competitors racing ahead while he fell further behind, sales meetings that went nowhere, marketing that produced nothing. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, suffocating. Here's what Andrew didn't realize at the time. Every single one of those assessments, as factual as they seemed, was actually a creative decree in the spiritual realm. When he thought, "My business is failing," he wasn't making an observation. He was making a decision about what reality he would accept and reinforce with his consciousness. Each judgment was like another lock on a prison door, sealing him into the very circumstances he desperately wanted to escape. Then something shifted. Andrew discovered this principle that Wigglesworth had lived by, and he made a radical decision. He began catching himself every time fear and judgment arose about his business. Instead of rehearsing the lack, he would stop and recognize something that felt absurd given his bank statements. God knows nothing of failure. In the divine consciousness, infinite supply is flowing constantly right now, regardless of what his spreadsheets were showing. The appearance of lack wasn't the ultimate truth. Nothing changed externally for weeks. That's the part of this journey that tests everything you believe. The numbers still looked terrible. The stress was still real. But Andrew noticed his internal state beginning to transform. Less panic, more peace, even though the circumstances remained unchanged. He was retraining his consciousness to stop feeding the problem with judgment, and that inner shift was preparing the ground for what came next. Within 2 months, something mysterious began happening. A client he hadn't heard from in years reached out with a major project. An opportunity appeared seemingly out of nowhere, the kind of breakthrough that you can't engineer through networking or marketing strategies. Former customers started returning without explanation. The turnaround didn't come from Andrew working harder or implementing some new business strategy. It emerged because he stopped blocking divine flow with his constant judgments about failure and lack. Now let me show you how this works in relationships, because this is where the impact becomes deeply personal. Sophia had been carrying the weight of a broken relationship with her adult son for over a year. He was distant, angry, barely speaking to her. Every conversation either didn't happen or ended in conflict. And every single day, Sophia's mind would rehearse the same judgments. He's being unfair. He's holding grudges. Our relationship is destroyed. He needs to change. Each thought felt completely justified based on his behavior. But what Sophia couldn't see was that every judgment was actually maintaining the separation she wanted healed. The hidden truth here is staggering. When Sophia recognized that in God's reality, love is the only presence, when she stopped seeing her son through the lens of his anger and instead held him in the consciousness of divine perfection, something began shifting in the invisible realm. The transformation didn't come from her trying harder to reach him or waiting for him to finally decide to change. It came from her withdrawing the judgmental consciousness that had been unknowingly reinforcing the brokenness. Type in the comments, "My consciousness creates my reality," if you're tracking with how profound these principles actually are. Here's where this gets intensely practical, because every single day you're bombarded with appearances that demand your judgment. Someone cuts you off in traffic and instantly your mind labels them as reckless, inconsiderate, dangerous. You wake up with a pain in your body and immediately the diagnosis starts running through your thoughts. Something's wrong, I'm getting sick, this could be serious. You check your bank account and the numbers trigger an avalanche of judgments about lack, insufficiency, financial stress. A colleague criticizes your work, and within seconds you've judged the situation as unfair, them as difficult, yourself as undervalued. Every single one of these moments is a test. And here's the revelation that Wigglesworth understood at a level most believers never reach. All of these appearances exist in the realm of effects, not in the realm of cause. They're shadows, not substance. Reflections, not reality. When you judge them as powerful, as real, as ultimate truth, you're actually giving them the only power they have over you. You become the source of their continued existence in your experience. This is the hidden mechanism behind why some people seem untouchable by circumstances that would destroy others. It's not that they have easier lives or face fewer challenges. It's that they've mastered the art of seeing through appearances to the divine truth underneath. When chaos erupts around them, their consciousness doesn't agree with the chaos. When lack shows up, they don't empower it with judgmental thinking. When sickness tries to take hold, they refuse to accept it as their reality. They've trained themselves to operate from cause rather than being tossed around by effects. Now let me give you something you can implement immediately, right now, with whatever situation is pressing on you. Think about the biggest challenge you're facing today. Maybe it's financial pressure that keeps you awake at night. Maybe it's a health symptom that's been worrying you. Maybe it's a relationship that feels beyond repair. Maybe it's a career setback that seems to define your future. Your mind has already judged this situation dozens, maybe hundreds of times. You've labeled it, defined it, declared it as your current reality. Here's the shift that changes everything. Instead of letting that automatic judgment run unchallenged, you pause. Just pause for a moment. And in that pause, you ask yourself a question that penetrates through the illusion. What exists in God's consciousness right now regarding this situation? Not what will exist if things improve. Not what existed before the problem appeared. What exists right now in the divine mind? And the answer is always the same. Perfection, wholeness, abundance, complete harmony. These aren't future possibilities you're hoping for. These are present realities that your judgments have been blocking from manifestation. I know this feels uncomfortable at first. Your rational mind will scream that you're denying reality, that you're being irresponsible, that the problem is real and needs to be acknowledged. That resistance is completely normal, because we've spent our entire lives training our consciousness to judge everything constantly. We've made assessment and evaluation our default mode of operation. Breaking that pattern feels unnatural, even dangerous. But here's what happens each time you notice judgment arising and choose to withdraw it. You crack open a door that's been locked shut. You create space for the miraculous to enter. You stop being an obstacle to your own breakthrough. Drop in the comments, "I withdraw my judgment," if you're ready to start practicing this in your own life right now. Wigglesworth didn't just practice this principle occasionally when he felt spiritual. He developed what he called spiritual vision, a complete retraining of how he perceived everyone and everything he encountered. Think about what happens when you meet someone for the first time. Your mind immediately registers their age, their appearance, their social status, their mood, their physical condition. All of this happens in milliseconds, automatically, without conscious effort. You've categorized them before they've even finished saying hello. That's human perception, operating at full speed, and it's exactly what keeps us locked in surface-level reality. But here's the transformation that's available when you develop spiritual vision. You train yourself to look past all of those temporary appearances and recognize what's actually true beneath the costume of flesh and circumstance. When Wigglesworth looked at someone, his first recognition wasn't their age or their ailment or their social position. His first seeing was of God's perfect expression standing before him. The body he observed was temporary, constantly changing, subject to decay. But the spiritual being inhabiting that body was eternal, flawless, untouchable by disease or limitation or time itself. This isn't about using your imagination to pretend people are something they're not. This is about training your consciousness to see what's genuinely true. The physical realm is real, yes, but it's not ultimate. It's effect, not cause. It's shadow, not light. When you develop the capacity to see the divine nature first before the human appearance registers its claims, you're operating from a completely different dimension of reality, and that shift in your vision creates a shift in what manifests around you. Now, I want to show you how this works in the middle of your chaotic, demanding, overwhelming daily life, because the real test of spiritual maturity isn't what happens during your prayer time or when you're listening to teaching. It's what happens when you're stuck in traffic, when your boss is breathing down your neck, when your kids are losing their minds, when the bills are due and the money isn't there. That's when you discover whether this is just philosophy or whether it's become your actual operating system. Wigglesworth talked about living in what he called the secret place. This isn't a physical location you retreat to. It's an inner sanctuary, a dimension of consciousness that you maintain even while your body is moving through all the noise and pressure of the external world. Picture it like this. Your physical self is dealing with meetings, errands, conversations, problems, decisions. All of that is happening in the realm of time and space where challenges appear real and urgent. But simultaneously, your consciousness is anchored in this secret place where no judgment exists, where divine perfection is the only reality you're accepting. This is what it means to live in two worlds at the same time. Your body navigates the human experience with all its apparent difficulties, but your consciousness dwells in the realm where God's wholeness is all that exists. Problems may seem to be pressing in from every direction in the temporal realm, but in the eternal now of divine consciousness there are no problems. There's only perfection, only completion, only abundance that never runs out. When you learn to maintain this dual awareness, the circumstances that would normally overwhelm you lose their power, because you're no longer giving them the agreement of your consciousness. The impact of mastering this inner sanctuary is extraordinary. You can walk through situations that would crush someone else, and you remain unshaken, not because you're strong or resilient in human terms, but because the part of you that's anchored in divine reality knows that appearances are temporary, while truth is eternal. Write in the comments, "I live from the secret place," if this is resonating with where you are on your journey. Here's something that will completely shift how you approach every challenge that comes your way. Notice how every judgment you make involves time. You look at a situation and think about what was wrong in the past, what should change right now, what will hopefully improve in the future. Your entire assessment exists in the timeline of past, present, and future. But here's the revelation that breaks you free from that mental prison. Spiritual truth doesn't exist in time. It exists only in the eternal now, in the perpetual present tense of divine reality. When Wigglesworth caught himself slipping into judgment, he would immediately make this shift. Instead of thinking about how things were or how they should become, he anchored himself in what is, not what was true yesterday, not what will be true tomorrow. What is true right now in God's consciousness. Perfection is, wholeness is, love is, supply is. These aren't future promises you're waiting to receive. These aren't past blessings you've lost. They're present realities that exist right now regardless of what your circumstances are screaming at you. This changes everything about how you pray, how you think, how you navigate your daily reality. You stop living in the torture of, "This was broken," or "This should be different," or "Someday this will improve." You rest in the eternal is of divine presence. And in that resting, something mysterious happens. The timeline collapses. The gap between what appears to be and what actually is begins to close. You're not waiting for God to fix something. You're recognizing what's already complete in the realm of truth. Now let me be completely honest with you about the challenges you're going to face as you start implementing this. Your mind has been operating on autopilot for decades, maybe your entire life. You've built neural pathways that automatically judge everything you encounter. These patterns run deep, and they don't surrender without resistance. You're going to forget this principle completely for hours, maybe days at a time. You'll suddenly realize you've been judging everything and everyone around you, and that awareness might trigger frustration with yourself. That's all part of the journey. Behind the scenes of every spiritual transformation is this reality. Progress isn't linear and perfection isn't the goal. The goal is catching yourself sooner. At first, you might judge for an entire day before you notice. Then you catch yourself after a few hours. Eventually, you notice judgment arising and can release it in the moment. That progressive awareness is the real victory, not some imagined state where you never judge again. Here's another challenge that's going to test you constantly. Other people will invite you to judge with them all day long. Someone complains about politics and expects you to join in their negative assessments. A coworker gossips about someone and wants you to agree with their criticism. Family members rehearse problems and wait for you to confirm how terrible everything is. The social pressure to judge together is enormous, because that's how human connection often works in the superficial realm. Wigglesworth's approach to this was brilliant in its simplicity. He maintained his non-judging consciousness silently, without announcing it or preaching about it to others. He could listen compassionately to someone's feelings, without agreeing with their negative assessments. He could acknowledge that someone was experiencing pain without confirming their judgment that the pain defined their reality. He remained inwardly anchored in truth, while being genuinely kind in human interaction. This takes real wisdom and skill. You're not becoming spiritually superior or judgmental about people who judge. You're simply holding a different frequency while still honoring their humanity. Leave a comment. I'm beginning again right now, if you're committed to this practice even when it feels impossible. Let me share a story that will show you just how far this principle can take you when you've built the capacity through years of practice. There was a man named Vincent, whose wife received the kind of news that shatters most people's world: a terminal diagnosis. Doctors gave her a time frame measured in months, not years. Every medical report, every test result, every prognosis pointed to the same inevitable conclusion. The evidence was overwhelming, scientific, backed by expertise and statistics. This is where most people, even people of faith, would crumble under the weight of what appears to be undeniable reality. But Vincent had spent years training his consciousness to see beyond appearances. This wasn't theory anymore. This was the ultimate test of everything he'd been practicing. And here's what's crucial to understand. Vincent didn't ignore medical reality or refuse treatment. His wife received excellent medical care from skilled professionals. But while her body was being treated in the physical realm, Vincent maintained something that defied every logical instinct. He refused to accept the diagnosis as the final word. He would not empower that appearance with the agreement of his consciousness. For 18 months, Vincent held an unwavering vision. While sitting in hospital rooms, while hearing doctors discuss palliative care, while facing moments of fear that threatened to consume him, he kept returning to this truth. In divine consciousness, only life exists. His wife's spiritual perfection was unchanged, untouched, complete. The appearance of disease, as real as it seemed in the physical dimension, was not ultimate reality. Day after day, week after week, month after month, he maintained this inner knowing while tears fell and uncertainty pressed in from every side. And then something began shifting. Small improvements that surprised the medical team. Symptoms that gradually subsided. Test results that didn't match the predicted trajectory. Years later, Vincent's wife remains healthy and vibrant, long past the time frame that medical science had confidently predicted. The healing didn't come from denying medicine or refusing practical help. It emerged from Vincent's refusal to give the appearance of death more authority than the reality of life. His consciousness became a clear channel for divine perfection to manifest, and the impossible became visible. Now, this level of spiritual mastery doesn't happen overnight, and that's what I want you to understand clearly. When you practice non-judgment consistently over time, something fundamental shifts in how you experience life. You begin living from what Wigglesworth called the infinite invisible. Your security, your peace, your confidence no longer depends on visible circumstances. Nothing in the appearing world can genuinely threaten you anymore, because you've stopped judging it as ultimately powerful or real. And here's what becomes beautiful about this transformation. You don't become cold or detached from people's suffering. Actually, you become more compassionate, more present, more genuinely helpful. But you're seeing their struggles without judging them as permanent victims of circumstances. You can sit with someone in their darkest moment and hold space for their pain, while simultaneously knowing their true nature remains perfect and untouchable. Your consciousness, cleared of judgment, becomes a healing presence that others can feel, even if they can't explain it. This is the complete path that those two words contain. Judge not properly understood and practiced will take you from human consciousness, trapped in appearances, to spiritual consciousness anchored in truth, from suffering to peace, from endless seeking to finally finding what you've been searching for all along. Type in the comments, "I am living from truth," if you're ready to walk this path regardless of what appearances try to tell you. You've stayed with me through this entire journey, and that tells me something significant about where you are spiritually right now. You're not just looking for surface-level inspiration or quick fixes. You're ready for transformation that goes deep, that changes how you see reality itself, that rewrites the operating system of your consciousness. And I want to keep walking this path with you. If this content is serving you, if these principles are landing in your spirit and shifting how you approach your daily life, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. This isn't just random spiritual content. This is carefully crafted teaching designed to take you from where you are to where you're meant to be. Every video builds on these foundations, revealing more layers of truth that most believers never discover. And do me a favor. Leave a comment right now and just write, "This message was meant for me." When I see those comments, it reminds me why I create this content. It's not about numbers or metrics. It's about real people having real breakthroughs, and your comment becomes part of that collective transformation we're building together. If you found value here, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who need to hear it, people who are stuck in judgment and don't even realize it's what's blocking their miracles. Your one click might be what puts this video in front of someone whose life is about to change. Before you go, there's a video right here that goes even deeper into how your words and consciousness shape your reality. It's the perfect next step after what we've covered today. Click and continue with me over there. I promise it's going to build on everything that's already shifting inside you right now.